Charlotte Dujardin, Olympic champion, equestrian icon, a rider who redefined modern dressage. But what happens when a golden reputation collides with controversy? This podcast is all about diving deeper into the equestrian world, beyond just the headlines. I'm Caroline Lindsay, horsesaddlerider.com. Welcome to the Horse Saddle Rider podcast, the place where I scrutinise the big issues shaping the horse world today. In this episode, I begin by spending 10 minutes or so reviewing the comments left on my YouTube channel in response to the second episode of this book reading. This episode has details of Charlotte riding Valegro and her training relationship with Carl Hester leading to her national titles. Apologies for the echo at the end of this soundtrack. Bear with me for a couple of minutes. Normal service will resume. So let's get started. Thank you very much for your comments, your contributions, and for generally just following this, because if we don't keep it going, then there are a lot of people who may just forget that it ever happened. They may window dress it and it will be business as usual, and still these sport horses will continue to suffer. So before I go to the book, I would like to have a look at the comments on the video, the last video. First one is remarking about Valegro being a very severe head shaker early in his training. And they say, a head shaker so bad that Hester considered surgery. He was not sound, and that poor horse had to endure such a rigorous training schedule, had to travel and live under so much stress. It's really hard to listen to. But thank you again for sharing it. Everyone thinks these Olympians and their horses are born from fairy tales, where they are actually created from. My response, it's devastating that these riders continue to ride when their horse is clearly in pain. Or should we look to the veterinarians to make it clear that the horse should not be ridden? Admittedly, there is no doubt when a horse is lame, although even those are being medicated for work, but it's clearly the veterinarian who has the duty of care to prevent suffering and head shaking while riding, as has been described for Valegro, absolutely is suffering. The problem is nobody's being held accountable for the horse's suffering here. And yet it's being normalized that there isn't a problem with this, because Charlotte Dujardin has put this in her autobiography. She's not even trying to hide it. Thank you for the analysis part 2, interesting training methods. It's not training. Valegro sounds like he was put under an immense amount of pressure, and that is what makes a horse break down, never to recover, ready to be thrown on the muck heap. CD sounds competitive to the point of full-on aggression. Yeah, very interesting insight there, that the will to win can be so aggressive. Now, almost it's like the video, the horsewhipping video, is like a culmination, a demonstration, a manifestation of that full-on aggression. So this is where really worrying stuff, and this is why I'm making these videos and reading the book. This is it in her own words. I'm not here to make stuff up. I'm reading from her book. I know some of you think that I'm here villainizing her, but these are her own words. These are her recollections, her experiences, and I'm deeply concerned about them. But I'm more concerned that the RSPCA in the UK haven't jumped on this. I'm assuming that because there is a process, an ongoing process with the FEI, that the RSPCA is waiting in the wings to see what the outcome will be. And it's probably difficult for the FEI committee, the disciplinary committee, to do the right thing here and do what the public expects them to do, because we may find that their procedures are not robust enough to protect the sport horses that are registered with them and the riders who abuse them. So they're going through changes at the moment, and I have seen some positive things coming from the direction of the FEI, and I'll talk about those when I've completed the book review. So it's interesting times. Being at the top of her game, the world is watching, not necessarily to fail, but watching her every move, because she's now in the spotlight and under the radar. Yeah, we all thought something very different about her. We held her in the highest esteem because we believed that she was an ethical rider. As Isabel Worth said of Tortillas, those who rise high fall deep. Yeah, they do. This is the world of celebrity. It's possible to be cancelled, especially seems you can cancel yourself as well. And this applies not to everyone, but to those who may become overconfident or complacent and at the top of their game. Yes, invincible. They may think that they can't fall because they're so far up. But that said, I do think that Charlotte Dujardin got a massive shake-up to have had to withdraw from the Olympics while she was getting ready to go. Basically, she just had her hat and coat to get on and go on her way. And is that true that the curb chain lies on an acupressure point? There's very little science on acupuncture. We know that it can address certain conditions and that it's a useful treatment, but until there's more evidence of where these points are, then I can't comment. Jennifer, our resident former FEI judge, retired paramedic and horse trainer in Ontario, Canada. I've spoken to parents telling them in a nice way that their child isn't ready to go to a show. They get upset with me often, but I hold my ground. I will not put any child in a dangerous position. And at a show, there's so much going on. The horse or pony that they own isn't ready for the showground yet. But then I'll tell the parent, I'll take that horse or pony to some shows, get them used to the atmosphere, and then, and only then, when they aren't reactive, will I allow that student to go to a show. Yeah, I thought that was the norm, was to, first of all, take horse and rider to familiarize themselves with competition conditions, but it would seem not. And as I was saying in the last session, it's the parents' ambition, and even if the parents aren't ambitious, obviously they want their child to have as much opportunity as possible, but they need to cool their jets, some of them, or the child risks being injured. And then, and only then, when they aren't reactive, will I allow that student to go to a show. I've basically said, go Jen, back in the day, this is how we did it. We had lead rein classes for young children to get the experience in the safest way. So they could still participate, they could still compete, but under highly controlled conditions. Somebody's asking why they can't find Jennifer's name on the FEI judges list. Some people just don't believe you. Some people are very skeptical. Jennifer gives the reasons why. She's been retired for over 20 years and they don't keep names on longer than that if they were whistleblowers and troublemakers like I was. And basically, she's been erased from the books. Somebody here says, time to leave her alone. That's Charlotte Dujardin referring to me. And I've said I'll stay on this case until the RSPCA take over. And another comment, absolutely agree. Animal abuse and cruelty is not only increasing, it's become more horrific. Yeah, in these times that we live in, where we've had more information than we ever had, and yet animals are still being abused in the name of sport. And somebody wants to see some video of me actually riding. There's none on your site. Is that deliberate? No. Well-meaning but physically unfit people are abusive when they ride. They can't help it. Yeah, fair comment. So I've said, sure you can. I'll include some in my next video. Although these days I have only been riding a simulator. When I was riding regularly, we didn't have phones with cameras on. I completely agree about abusive riding, and many riders are completely unaware of how much better they can load the horse. Hence why I wrote the textbook and provided guidance for them to develop better posture for riding. My techniques are instantaneous, and I've also included a section for riders aiming to reduce their weight using easy ways to incorporate light exercise into their busy day. So I will go ahead and show you a clip of me riding my simulator, just for the doubters out there. So if you want pictures of me, that's me there, and my young horse doing dressage. And this is me doing some show jumping. Riding club, local. I always enjoyed my horses. Competing, I mostly did for them because they enjoyed the variety. They loved loading onto the trailer, never had to coerce mine onto a trailer, and we would go out and do something different, somewhere different. Okay, so here I am. My simulator is monitoring my vertical loading and my mediolateral, so left to right loading, and also back to front loading. So I'm aiming to be central as I can, following the movement of the horse. So just out of interest for you, you'll notice that I am the most balanced load when my pelvis moves under my shoulders, so I keep my head and shoulders level, and my pelvis moves forward of that position, not backwards. It's surprising how many move backwards. Okay, so hopefully that should be enough of a demo of my riding for the person who queried it. Okay, the book.
One day, a month or two after I arrived at Carl's, Lucy and I were having a lesson with him. Blueberry was pulling Lucy around like a rag doll. And as I'm taller than her at 5'6", Carl told us to swap. Lucy got on the horse I was riding, and I got on Blueberry. It sounds like she was another working pupil. From that first moment, I loved him. Absolutely loved him. I think what she loved was the way he moved. He was fiery. He was sensitive. He was expressive. He was powerful. Everything I'd always wanted in a horse, he was. It felt like he was the missing piece I had been looking for. When you sit on Blueberry, you really feel like you're part of him because he's so solid and built like a barrel. Your legs wrap right the way round. The power was like nothing I'd ever felt in my life. When I asked for canter, it felt as if we were going to take off. The only thing I can compare it to is a roller coaster. It gave me that same thrill in the pit of my stomach. The buzz of going so fast, it was almost like losing control. And if you watch the first video, she certainly doesn't seem to be afraid of horses being out of control because she is confident that she can sort them out, as she says earlier in the book. Even then, I could feel how much I could achieve with him, so fulfilling her ambitions. This was my perfect dance partner. But he was a head shaker, and it was so serious that Carl was beginning to think he might not even have a career. Carl had tried all sorts of medicines, had all sorts of specialists out, and had even thought about having Blueberry operated on. He was so sensitive to everything, nothing could touch Blueberry's skin. Metal buckles would sometimes give him a rash. Wonder why the noseband had to be fairly tight then, as in his photos there seemed to be indentations on the nose and around the front of the face. You'd be with him and he'd be trying to bang his head or rub his face with his legs or drag his nose up the walls. That's awful. So was she was riding him at the time, even though he was severely uncomfortable. With time, we found out that putting Blueberry in a double bridle helped too. Normally, you put a double bridle on a horse when they're 6, coming 7, because until then, their teeth are changing. Blueberry was 5.5, but the curb chain definitely seemed to make a difference. It lies on an acupuncture pressure point. And although straightforward acupuncture hadn't worked for Blueberry, with the curb chain on, he did seem to be more relaxed. What's more, it gave me more control over him. Blueberry was the kind of horse who, if he didn't feel like his rider was in charge, he'd start to worry. So, justification for this, possibly? So she's picked up that he's not quite as willing in that sense of his training, but that he needs something of a strong, determined, confident rider, perhaps, which is not unusual for sport horses that are bred for sport. In March, Carl was due to be away in Spain for 3 weeks competing on what's known as the Sunshine Tour. It would be 3 weeks when I could focus on working with Blueberry and, I hoped, prove just how good he was. Chapter 6. It sounds funny, but the problem with Blueberry was that he tried so hard. Always trying to jump ahead, and then when he didn't understand what I wanted him to do, he'd get tense. There were 2 arenas, indoor and outdoor. The indoor was smaller, so that's where I rode Blueberry with less space and 4 walls round him. It was easier to keep him under control. Okay, so she's working in a young horse in a small area, which was hard work for him. As well as working to make him more relaxed, I was also trying to get him more supple. Tension would make him tight, and while some horses get stiff in their mouths and necks, with Blueberry it was his whole body that would go rigid. So to me, with my experience of training, conditioning, my academic knowledge, I wouldn't be surprised at this horse getting tense, being ridden in a small area. I just wonder how much relaxation he could get in a small area. Although she says I concentrated on lots of easy, basic transitions and simple exercises, from her perspective, things that he could cope with and wouldn't get him stressed. And the more relaxed he was, the better he got. So it sounds like he has some discomfort that she's trying to work through. Come on, Blueberry, I'd say every time I got on him. We need it to be a good day today. Well, with sound training methods, every day should be a good training day. Although, as she said earlier, horses can go through a phase of dental issues while their dentition is changing. But again, I don't see any reference to, I wonder if this horse is in pain. He's a strong, powerful horse. She hasn't got the confidence to ride him in a large arena. So he gets ridden in a small one because he's easier to control. By the time Carl came back, Blueberry was much more on the bit and not so stiff, and I'd also managed to slow down his canter. Well, you would in a small arena. Obviously, Carl wasn't about to give Blueberry to me, but after we talked, he agreed I could compete him at the lower levels, which, as an international rider, Carl couldn't do anyway. So, right place, right time. Carl couldn't ride him at lower levels, and probably if he could, he would. As Des, her horse, was a year ahead of Blueberry and that much easier to ride, it was easier for Carl to teach me new movements on Des, and for me then to transfer what I'd learned to Blueberry. Okay, so she still has some gaps in her knowledge. So she needed to learn the moves on her own horse before applying them to Valegro. With him, I was also understanding the importance of timing. If you correct a horse, it has to be at the right moment, because if you do it too late, the horse misunderstands. So, presumably, in her abuse video, this is not the lesson she was applying there at all. That horse was being attacked, and she wasn't going to take the pressure off that horse at all, as in there would be a reward for doing something right. That horse had to guess what she wanted, but she seems to know here about horses misunderstanding punishment. But I'm the kind of person who always has to set myself goals. And when I got the Carl, I set myself 3. The first was to ride on a team with him, Carl, because he was the best there was. The second was to ride at the London Olympia Horse Show, because that was the only major show that, as a child, I never managed to qualify for. But the biggest goal was to ride at London 2012. And I can't tell you how much I wanted it. Although I knew that just wanting it wasn't enough, if it was going to happen, I was going to have to go out and fight for it. It wouldn't be easy, but I knew I wasn't going to let anything stand in my way, such as the horse, for example. And there's some photos here. She says she was never one for sitting still. And with Mum's passion for horses, it wasn't surprising that both my sister and I were hooked almost instantly. My first pony ride, aged only 6 months. This is a strange posture for the horse, hollowing its back with 2 children on it. Here is her in her showing days, and presumably working hunter showing here. She's got some grass reins on. These are used to stop the usually ponies from stretching down to have a nibble of grass and yanking the weak child forward. But there doesn't seem to be much grass around on this concrete. More showing. So her sister and I didn't compete much against each other, but we still argued all the time about who'd won what. So really fierce sense of competitiveness here. What have I learned since? is that you don't need those big paces in a young Grand Prix horse. Just 3 correct paces that you can train. It's not often that horses who are really big movers and scoring 10s when they're young go on to have long careers simply because of all the wear and tear on their bodies. So she's aware that horses can be injured and potentially retired early. Because he was so strong, I wasn't very confident that going backwards would be something he was going to agree to. Okay, so the horse had to perform a rein back. Anyway, Carl and I set about teaching him, me on Valegro standing next to a wall to keep him straight, Carl tapping his front legs with a whip, and eventually he managed to do it. But he was absolutely dragging himself. He was leaning his whole weight into my hand, and he was completely locked in his jaw.
Okay, so at what point do you say this horse is not correct? The horse has gaps in his education and in his postural conditioning. It seems to me that there's no creativity going on here. It's just cut straight to the endpoint or the outcome without considering the horse. So why was Valegro so heavy in the hand here? What was going on? Why wouldn't they stop and try something else? Maybe they did, but again, this is normalizing coercion. We decided it would have to do. And on that day, it turned out to be the least of my worries. Not only was the weather hot and the flies out, so Blueberry was shaking his head all over the place. The horse had a problem, Charlotte. The horse should not have been ridden at that point. And I've known animals and even people, if you've got a pain, you want to put pressure on it. So whatever was going on that was causing the head shaking, was that part of the horse's strategy to alleviate the source of the head shaking, the neurological source of it, to the extent that he had to push so hard into it? Let me know. That might be me being dramatic, but you don't expect a dressage horse to be so heavy in the hand. I rode down the centre line, halted, went to rein back, and Blueberry did not move. He was locked in my hand, absolutely rigid. I tried to pull him backwards, so she added even more pressure through the bit, but he was like a rock. The only part of him that was moving was his head, and eventually it got to the point where he turned it so much I could see his face. Why not just get off and sort the problem out? Why does this have to be about I'm going to sort it, as she's admitted in her early days of training ponies as a child? The look he was giving me just said, what are you doing? I tried and tried to get him to move, and eventually one of the judges, who was chuckling away, stage whispered across, pull harder, in capital letters. So the judge is suggesting that she pull harder. This is just such unbelievable ignorance.
If you found this episode thought-provoking, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And if you enjoyed this deep dive, leave a review. It really helps more equestrians and horse lovers find the podcast. You can also join the conversation on the Horse Saddle Rider YouTube channel. And finally, I'll be giving you more insights into the equestrian world. So be sure to come back and join me so that together we can campaign for better conditions for our sport horses.